She didn't look like a star. No flashy outfit. No stage confidence. No practice smile. Just a quiet, nervous teenage girl standing under the brightest lights she had ever seen, holding herself like she was trying to disappear. The audience didn't know what to expect. Honestly, neither did she. Courtney Hadwin grew up in a tiny village called Heselden in County Durham, England. A place so small, most people have never heard of it. And for most of her childhood, Courtney felt exactly like that place. Overlooked. Forgotten. Like she existed just outside the edges of the world. She was different from other kids. Deeply shy. Uncomfortable in social situations. School was hard, not because she wasn't smart, but because fitting in felt impossible. While other kids laughed and made friends easily, Courtney felt like she was watching life through a window she couldn't open. But alone in her room, something else lived inside her. A voice. A fire. Something wild and raw and completely untamed. She had been singing since she could barely walk. Her family noticed it early. This wasn't just a hobby. This wasn't a phase. This little girl had something inside her that most people search their entire lives for and never find. She started performing in small local competitions. Tiny stages. Small crowds. But even then, people who watched her felt something shift in the room. Like the air changed when she sang. Still, nobody outside that small village knew her name. That was all about to change. Because in 2018, a 13-year-old girl from a place nobody had heard of walked onto the America's Got Talent stage and made the entire world feel something it wasn't ready for. The lights were blinding. 13 years old. Standing in front of thousands of strangers. Cameras pointed at her from every direction. And Courtney Hadwin looked absolutely terrified. She introduced herself in barely a whisper. The judges smiled politely. The audience waited. And somewhere in the back of that giant arena, people were already assuming this would be forgettable. Then the music started. And Courtney Hadwin became someone else entirely. The moment she opened her mouth, something electric shot through that room. Her voice, raw, powerful, soulful beyond her years, poured out like she had been saving it her entire life. She moved like a young Janis Joplin. She screamed like she had lived 1,000 years of pain. She threw herself into that performance with everything she had. The crowd erupted. Judges jumped to their feet before the song was even finished. Howie Mandel stared with his mouth open. Simon Cowell, a man famous for being impossible to impress, looked genuinely stunned. Mel B was on her feet, screaming. And then Howie Mandel reached forward and hit the golden buzzer. Gold confetti rained down from the ceiling. The crowd went absolutely insane. Courtney stood there, shaking, crying, barely able to understand what had just happened. In 60 seconds, everything changed. The video spread across the internet like wildfire. Millions of views. Millions of shares. The whole world was asking the same question. Who is this girl? But here's what nobody talked about in all that excitement. Behind those tears of joy on that stage, there was something else. Something heavier. A weight that fame was about to make so much harder to carry. And most people never saw it coming. Overnight, Courtney Hadwin went from invisible to everywhere. Her audition video crossed 100 million views. Her name was trending across every platform. Talk show hosts wanted her. Music executives were calling. The entire world had decided this girl was going to be the next big thing. But nobody stopped to ask how a deeply shy 13-year-old girl was supposed to handle all of that. Because here's the thing about Courtney that the highlight reels never showed. The very thing that made her extraordinary on stage was the same thing that made real life so painful. She wasn't performing confidence. On that stage, something took over. Something bigger than her shyness, bigger than her fear. But off stage, she was still that quiet girl from Heselden who struggled to make eye contact. Sudden fame doesn't come with a guidebook. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't care that you're 13. It just arrives, loud and overwhelming and completely suffocating, and expects you to smile through all of it. The pressure was enormous. Expectations were impossible. And Courtney, who had spent her whole childhood feeling like she didn't belong anywhere, now had millions of strangers deciding exactly who she should be. She continued through the competition. Every performance stunning. Every week the crowd more invested. She finished in 4th place, an incredible achievement that somehow, in the cruel math of reality TV, still felt to many like a disappointment. And when the show ended, the silence was deafening. Because that's what nobody tells you about moments like that golden buzzer. The confetti falls, the crowd cheers, and then the cameras turn off. And you're left standing there, wondering, what now? After AGT, the music industry came knocking. Courtney signed with Atlantic Records. A real record deal. The kind of thing most artists spend decades chasing. On paper, everything was going perfectly. But the music world is a strange and complicated place, especially for a teenage girl with a voice that didn't fit neatly into any modern category. Courtney's sound was vintage, raw, old soul. It belonged to a different era of music, the kind of music that makes you feel something real. And the industry kept trying to smooth out her edges. There were creative differences, delays. The music that came out didn't always sound like the Courtney the world had fallen in love with. Fans noticed. They wanted that wild, untamed girl from the AGT stage. What they got sometimes felt different. It's a story as old as the music industry itself. An artist with something pure and rare gets discovered, and then slowly, the machinery around them tries to reshape that purity into something more sellable. For Courtney, caught between who she naturally was and who the industry wanted her to become, the pressure was quietly crushing. And through all of it, she was still a teenager, still growing up, still figuring out who she was as a person, while the entire world had already decided who she was supposed to be. She posted occasionally on social media, gave small glimpses into her life. But the more time passed, the more that enormous presence she'd had in 2018 seemed to quietly fade. Fans began to worry. Where had she gone? What was happening behind the scenes? And why did someone with that much talent seem to be slowly stepping back from the spotlight? The answer was more human than most people expected. Here is something Courtney has been open about, and something that deserves to be said with care and with kindness. Courtney Hadwin has spoken about her struggles with anxiety, with the overwhelming nature of public life, with how hard it is to be someone who experiences the world so intensely and then be asked to perform that experience for millions of strangers on demand. For many fans, this was the missing piece. It reframed everything. The shyness wasn't just shyness. The quiet wasn't just quiet. This was a young woman carrying a genuinely heavy emotional weight, and doing it largely in public, largely alone, largely without the world fully understanding what it cost her. Think about what she had been through. Discovered at 13. Viral at 13. A record deal at 13. Millions of opinions about her voice, her look, her future. All before she was old enough to drive a car. Most adults would crumble under that pressure. And yet she kept going. She kept creating. Kept writing. Kept finding her way back to the music that had always been her truest language. Because that's the thing about Courtney Hadwin that gets lost in all the tragedy framing. She never actually gave up. She just needed time. Space. The chance to grow into herself without the entire world watching and judging every single step. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, like the world expected something from you that you didn't know how to give, like you were too much and not enough at the same time, then you already understand Courtney better than most headlines ever could. Courtney Hadwin did not disappear. She just grew up, away from the cameras, away from the noise, away from the impossible expectations that had been placed on a 13-year-old girl who just wanted to sing. She continued releasing music, continued performing, continued being exactly what she always was, an artist who feels everything deeply and puts all of it into her voice. And slowly, beautifully, she started finding herself again. Her more recent work carries a maturity that her AGT audition only hinted at. You can hear it, the growth, the pain, the survival, all woven into every note. She isn't the nervous girl on that stage anymore. She's something more, someone who walked through fire and came out the other side still singing. The fans who stayed, and there are many, know they are watching something rare. Not just a talented singer, but a human being in the process of becoming who they were always meant to be. That's not a tragedy. That's actually one of the most beautiful stories in music. And maybe, just maybe, the world is finally ready to listen to it properly. Because Courtney Hadwin was never meant to be a one-moment wonder. She was never meant to be a viral clip or a competition result or a headline. She was meant to be an artist. And artists, the real ones, don't burn bright for 60 seconds and disappear. They burn for a lifetime.